Thank you to those who are joining, and thank you to those of you who are watching the recording of this. I'm delighted that Rabbi Manning is back with us to give us a shiur. The shiur of the, the title even of the shiur is Succot, Don't Worry, Be Happy. And I'm going to try and say the next slide with the appropriate emotion. Really? Question mark, exclamation mark. I guess the clue is going to be, for those of you who stay on to listen to what the title means, you'll find out actually how I should have said that line properly, or I'm sure Rabbi Manning will give the correct version. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rabbi Manning. Thank you, Rabbi Manning, for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Someone else is coming on then. That's great. Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Robert Finn. Very kind of you to give that introduction. I'm glad we all got the technology to work well enough. And anyway, I would just encourage you. It's lovely to be with you, but at the moment I can't see you, which is okay. If everyone's sitting there in their pajamas and eating toast and jam or whatever it is, then that's fine. But if there is anybody out there who has a real human face, I would just mention that as giving the shiur, it's easier to give it to a face than a name. But I will leave it up to you as to what you feel you can do with that. At least every now and then, if I see a face, I can see a smile, and if I see a smile, I know that somebody is getting the shiur. But anyway, fine. The technology side of it is Baruch Hashem working. I just wanted to mention that if for whatever reason I freeze, it does sometimes happen, and there are glitches on the line. My camera goes a bit weird. Don't worry, if I have to leave, I'll be right back on again. So hopefully that won't be a problem. It often isn't, but if it is, don't run away. I will come back to you any second. Okay, so look, we're not we're not strangers. This is not the first time that I've given the shiur to the community, although there are a couple of new names on the Zoom, so people I don't know. So there may be people here who've not been at the other shiurim. But this is a discrete topic. Every one of the shiurim has been a separate topic. We've covered some really fascinating things through the year. Just remember that the whole point of this exercise was I was meant to be there with you live. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we will find a time and an ability to do that. But Zoom is going to have to be the next best thing. Okay, so first of all, I'm sorry not to be in my sukkah. I'm not really in the kotel. I wouldn't be, I think, able to get there even if I wanted. We're on lockdown here. But I'd love to be in my sukkah. If I were in my sukkah, however, you'd be able to hear all the people around me singing, or I'd disturb them sleeping or whatever. So you don't get to come from the sukkah. But we are going to discuss issues to do with Sukkot. Very important issues. And as Rabbi Finn pronounced the shiur, I think correctly, don't worry, be happy. Really? I mean, is that so straightforward? The pursuit of happiness is something that every single one of us, I think, has in common that we're looking for. Everybody wants to be happy. Not everybody wants more money. Not everybody wants more free time. Everybody's different in their goals in life. But everybody wants to be happy. Nobody wants to be in a state of unhappiness. And the Torah addresses this in a way that I think people don't really focus on. This is a very mainstream Torah theme. It's a mainstream mitzvah theme. In fact, we'll see today it's one of the constant mitzvot that applies throughout the whole of one's life, is this mitzvah to be happy. And I think it's a little bit been hijacked. People think that the Hasidim have a monopoly on being happy. That's not true. The Hasidim often have a very strong focus on the importance of happiness. Remember Rabbi Nachman, mitzvah gedola liyos b'simcha, that he put that phrase that it's a great mitzvah to be happy. Is he right? He is right. We'll see soon. The joke always goes that the mitnagdim, those who are against the Hasidim, said no, it's not a mitzvah gedola liyos b'simcha. It's a simcha gedola liyos b'mitzvah. It makes you very happy to be involved in mitzvahs. So maybe truth is maybe they're saying the same thing. Maybe they're really all coming from the same point, which is that there is a concept of simcha, of joy, of happiness. It's not to be walking around with a grin on our face. It's not that everything goes well all the time. It's not that we walk around feeling euphoric. It's not that. It's something much, much deeper and something more central to our mitzvah observance. So I want to look into this with you, with your permission. I want to share a few sources. I put the source sheet up on the chat. If anybody else didn't get that, then they're more than welcome to be in touch with me to download that, etc. What I want to do is I want to share my screen so that you can see the sources we're looking at. I hope you can see that. If not, then please let me know, and I'll sort of fiddle with the buttons, but hopefully you'll be able to see that. let's start, since it is Sukkot night, and a lot of people, normally we'd be running around Israel, seeing people doing things, going to Simcha Space or Shueva on Sukkot night. We can't do that this year. We're very much stuck in, and I know that England's heading more towards that now. Israel's already in that again. Who thought we would be here, at Pesach, when we thought we were on the way, a short time and then on the way out. So if we can't be dancing in a sukkah somewhere, we can learn and understand what that means and internalize, maybe on a more personal level, what that mitzvah of Simcha really is. So let's start with the concept of the Simcha on sukkahs. Let's start with the Rambam. There's going to be quite a lot of Rambam in today's shiur. The Ramban Maimonides, obviously a major rationalist, intellectual, but has a lot to say about Simcha. So at the end of the halachas of Sukkot, he says as follows. Let's read this together. It'll put us in the mood. Number one. Even though there's a mitzvah to be happy on every moed, every chag, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, although, and I would just maybe interrupt straight away there and mention an important point, which is that in the Torah itself, it doesn't say on Pesach that there is a mitzvah of Simcha. The rabbis learn it out from the Chagim having that in common. But Pesach doesn't mention Simcha. Shavuot mentions Simcha once, and Sukkot mentions Simcha twice. The very famous line, V'samachta b'chagecha, you must be happy on your chag being Sukkot, atau bincha v'tercha, all the different people you have to be happy with. V'hayita ach sameach. And it says at the end, and you will be only happy. This double repetition of the mitzvah of happiness on Sukkot is for a very specific reason, which is as follows. That if you think about it agriculturally, on Pesach, there wasn't much to be happy about. Pesach in the Torah is Chag HaAviv, the festival of buds. Aviv means a bud, like a little shoot. Meaning, if it's rained through the winter, Baruch Hashem, if we had the blessing of rain in the winter, Pesach really is the cupboards are empty. The food that we stored away from last Sukkot is gone, pretty much. There's a little bit of dry bread called matzah, which we're able to eat. We haven't got much to give to anybody else. But we're, we do our best to be happy. There's promise, there's potential, there's little green shoots, there's aviv. By Shavuot, there is a harvest. That's called, in the Torah calls it Chag HaKatzil. It's the ingathering, or the harvest, I should say, the harvest festival, which is the grain harvest. Meaning the fruits are not yet there. The fruits are still potential. There's a lot that can go wrong. And even the grain harvest, when we brought in the wheat harvest on Shavuot, if there's a rainstorm in a freak storm in June or July, it can ruin all the crops. So it's not yet money in the bank, but at least there is some food. By Sukkot, you have to understand that Sukkot for people in the agricultural world, Sukkot was payday. It was, imagine you got paid once a year, and only once a year, a check that you bring home on Erev Sukkot, you put it in the bank. Sukkot was money in the bank. It was food in the storehouse, the grains in, the fruits in, the stores are there, the year is finished, it's accounting time. That's why the mitzvah of Simcha is so stressed on Sukkot, because Sukkot really was payday. And understanding that puts us in the right mind frame. Okay, so he says, even though there's a mitzvah of Simcha on all the Moedim, go back to the sheet, on Sukkot, especially in the temple, there was an enormous amount of Simcha. You have to be happy before our God, Shivat Yamim, before God 7 days. What did they do? And this is quite well known. On Erev Sukkot, they made a structure in the temple where the women's gallery on the top, the men at the bottom, so they wouldn't be mixing and going crazy with each other. From the beginning of Chol HaMoed, from the end of the first Chag, in this year's falling out from Motzei Shabbos this week, and so too every single day, and all through Chol HaMoed, as soon as they brought the afternoon Tamid Ben Arbaim, Lismoach, they would celebrate the Shar Hayom for the rest of the day and all through the night. And the Rambam goes on to talk about how they do that. People would play musical instruments, people who could sing would sing, people who could dance would dance, they'd clap, they'd whistle, they'd do whatever they could, they would juggle with fire, with torches. The Gemara goes on a great length to say that these 7 nights of Sukkot, 6 really after the Chag, were the major celebration of the Jewish people in the year. This was But then, and here's the thing that people don't know, tucked away right at the end of this section of Halacha in the Rambam. The Rambam chooses then to talk about the mitzvah of what does it mean to be happy generally in life, not just on Sukkot. So he says as follows, right at the end, little gem tucked away. Simcha, the general simcha, the joy, sheismach adam ba'asiyat mitzvah, that a person can feel when they do a mitzvah, uba'ahavat ha'el shetziva b'hem, and the love, which we'll talk about, the love of God. What that means, love of God. I don't go to many shiur. I don't hear many. When I was a kid at school, they didn't talk to me about loving God. They talked to me about, shaking lulav and esrog, which is very important. But loving God, he says, you can do that. Avodah gedolah hi. This is an incredibly important. This is a great service. And anyone who holds back from this idea of simcha in mitzvah, simcha in connecting with Judaism, with life, with God, that person deserves some kind of punishment. What does he mean by that? And he quotes a verse which is important, which is very important for us to look at. Because the pasuk says you didn't serve Hashem with simcha, ubetuv leivav, and with a good heart, mirov kol, from all the blessings that we had in life. And however hard life was, and it wasn't always a bed of roses throughout Jewish history, if we weren't able to serve God with simcha in gratitude for what we had, then these terrible things happen. What's the Rambam talking about? Where's that pasuk from? This verse, it doesn't say in the Torah, you shall be happy. It doesn't say, don't worry, be happy. We should worry. We have what to worry about. In Shulchan Aruch, it says that the Jewish world is not perfect, imperfection. The whole world is not. There's stuff to worry about. It doesn't say be happy, but it says in the Tochacha. The Tochacha at the end of Dvarim is a whole section dedicated to the terrible punishments that would come to the Jewish people within time, of exile, of destruction, of devastation. There's an entire parsha, almost the Parshas Kitabo, that we read just before Rosh Hashanah, and it's absolutely devastating. It's awful. It's very, very intense, very negative. And the question that's unspoken all the way through this is like, why? What did we do? What did we do that was so terrible that we deserved such a treatment? Was it idolatry? Was it murder? What was it that we did? And this one little verse in the middle is the only identifying factor, which is Tachat asher lo avadat Hashem elokecha b'simcha. This is happening because you didn't serve Hashem with simcha and with a full heart. And that's remarkable. That's remarkable that in the Torah itself, it says that the consequence of not working on, it's not something you can get like this. Not working on this concept of a joy, of a simcha in life, is the cause of this terrible punishment. That's an incredibly strong statement. And we need to think about that, why that is. In fact, interestingly, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, he gives an understanding. He says that when we go wrong in life, when we do things which are chet, which are sin, for want of a better word, so then we are deserving of a consequence. You can't just bribe your way away from that. What avoids that, the rachamim, the mercy, if you like, that sweetens that din, is the feeling of simcha that we can engender in heaven, whatever that means, a sense of simcha. We don't want to be too anthropomorphic, but our simcha here is the cause, is the if you like, the spur for that simcha that happens above. And therefore he says that's really what's going on here. It's not that the simcha itself causes the blessing, it's the simcha avoids the problems that will come to us because of our inaction and our misdeeds in life. And therefore, us developing this sense of simcha is not just an extra. It's not just something which, well, okay, I did the mitzvah. Just look for a second at number 4. I'll go back to number 2 and 3. I do hope there's someone out there actually looking at the sheet. Maybe every now and then a little thumbs up would be useful. But if you look at number 4, you'll see that the Secret Radium, which is nothing to do with Haredi in the modern sense, but the Secret Radium was a late Middle Ages, a book of Jewish thought in the late medieval period. He says, Ikar schar ha-mitzvah ala simcha. The reward for doing any mitzvah, the main reward, the main sense of long-term meaning to that mitzvah, whatever the mitzvah is, you give tzedakah, you shake a lulav, you eat matzah, you put on tefillin, you daven, you learn Torah, you help somebody else, you go to a wedding, you make a kala happy, whatever it is, the main schar, the main reward of the mitzvah is the simcha. Ein hasimcha prak nosapa mitzvah. This is not an extra. So on a certain level, if we do a mitzvah, if we put up a mezuzah, if we, whatever we do, but we don't do it with the sense of simcha, we didn't really do the mitzvah. We can't turn around and say, oh, look at all the mitzvahs I did. You didn't, because you didn't really do them with that sense of commitment, with that sense of excitement, the energy, the positivity that the Torah is mandating here, not just suggesting and saying it's so central to mitzvah observance. So that's the first thing, that the Torah itself has this idea of simcha deeply embedded within it, not just on Sukkot, not just on the Chagim, and not just on the other specific mitzvahs that it says do this b'simcha, eating sacrifices or bringing things to the temple or whatever it is. A person has a mitzvah to make their wife happy for the first year of marriage, especially happy, etc. No, generally in life there is a mitzvah simcha. Now, of course, we know Tehillim, number 2, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, bo lefara b'nana. That's a pasuk which we sing, we know. We say every morning in shul. That is actually a pasuk in one of the mizmorim, one of the psalms we say in shul, in davening for Shacharis, Mizmor Todah. In fact, the mitzvah in the halacha in Shulchan Aruch is when we say in shul or at home Mizmor Todah in the morning, which in the middle of Shacharis, which has this verse Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, we're meant to sing. You're not meant to say it. You're meant to sing it, sing a tune, hum a tune, dance around a little bit. So this is meant to actually engender this feeling, but it's not just the pasuk in Tehillim. It's not a verse in Tehillim. It is, as we've seen, a central principle in the Torah. Now, where does it say anywhere in the Torah that there is a positive mitzvah of simcha? We see the negative. What if we don't do simcha? But where's there a positive? So if you look for a second in number 3, you'll see here that number 3 has as follows. The Mesilas Yesharim, the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, which is by Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, very important book of Musar, of character development, etc. He explains that the mitzvah of Simcha in the Torah is the mitzvah of Ahavat Hashem. And again, I don't think that these ideas are enough discussed, and therefore I want to try and put that right a little bit tonight. Just look at one line from Mesilas Yesharim. He says, when we come on to talk about the mitzvah of ahava, of loving God, and we're going to talk about that tonight properly. And there are 3 aspects to that mitzvah: hasimcha, hadveikus, v'hakinah. Simcha, the idea of joy; dveikus, the idea of clinging to and connecting with God; kinah, of desiring God and wanting to be close to God, etc. And he goes through all of those principles, and he says that this issue, let's just do one other line, sheyi ha'adam choshek, a person should desire, mitaveh, really wants very strongly, mamash el kirvasa yisbarach, wants to be close to a spiritual reality that we call God. But rodef achar kedushata, we want to be chasing after that. We want to be looking for that, running to that it's very energized. That's the point. We tend to be a bit kvetchy as Jews sometimes, and a bit miserable. I mean, who can blame us after all that's happened over the years? But that's not the way it's meant to be. Says, imagine what you're most excited about in life and what you most desire and you run after. That should be how we feel on a certain level about Ahavat Hashem. He goes into all sorts of areas of life specifically, which we're going to talk about, of Ahavat Hashem. So the mitzvah, really the end of this first part, is the mitzvah of simcha, of the idea of being happy. And we'll talk about what that means. Is really derived from these 2 areas. First of all, the mitzvah of Ahavat Hashem, the mitzvah to develop a sense of love for God, and secondly, the mitzvah of this pasuk in the middle, that we didn't serve Hashem with simcha. Okay, fine. That's at the end of part 1. Let me ask: is there anybody still out there at the end of part 1? Any takers? I can only assume you are the strong silent type. Okay, fine. So let us thumbs up. There is life. Excellent. Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate that. Okay, fine. Let's move on to discuss the issue of Simchat Torah. Where does that come from? We're going to come back to the idea of Simcha and joy and Ahavat Hashem, but let's talk about the issue of Simchatura. Simchatura is a relatively modern reality. Remember, the Torah itself specifies an 8-day festival, of which the first day is a Yom Tov, the middle is Chol HaMoed, and the last day, which the Torah calls Shmini, Yom HaShmini, the 8th day, Atzeret Lashem. It's an Atzeret which took on the title Shemini Atzeret. Okay, it doesn't mention anywhere in the Torah the idea of Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah was really born out of two things that came together. First of all, it was born out of the Yom Tov Sheni, that once the Jews in Chutz La'aretz were keeping 2 days of Yom Tov, now Jews, they were always keeping 2 days of Yom Tov, but once the center of gravity of the Jewish people moved firmly into Chutz La'aretz after the destruction, so there was a 9th day. There was a 9th day of Chag. What are we going to do on it? We're just going to have 2 days of Shmini Atzeret. We've already had 8 days of Chag. So this day of Simchat Torah was developed to be the main thing that happened on the 9th day. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that there were 2 different customs as to how they read the Torah. Not everybody knows this. Our custom today is to read the Torah on an annual basis. To finish at the end of Sukkot, to start to read the last parsha of Zot HaBracha on Simchat Torah, and to start again Parshas Bereishis immediately afterwards. However, that was not always the case. Look at the Rambam here for a second in number 5. The Rambam writes in the 12th century, HaMinhag HaPashut B'chol Yisrael, that the general minhag which is spread through the Jewish people, Shemashlimim et HaTorah b'shana achas, we finish the Torah reading every year. Each parsha on Shabbat is divided to 54 parshas. U'matchili b'Shabbat she'achar Sukkot, and we begin again the new cycle the week of the Shabbat after Sukkot. But Karim b'Holchin al Haseder, we read through the parshas one after the other. Haseder zeh achigomim et HaTorah b'chag Sukkot. We finish off the Torah on Sukkot. That's the main minhag. That's the main custom. But there are people still who follow the old Israel custom from the time of the temple and just after to read the Torah every 3 years. That is not so widespread anymore. But it still existed. And I brought you from Benjamin of Tudela, who traveled, one of the great travelers. He was like the Jewish Marco Polo, around the same time as well. In the mid-12th century, Benjamin of Tudela said as follows: in Cairo, there were 2 synagogues. And of course, the Rambam lived in Cairo, which is around the same time. One for those from Israel and one for those from Babylon. Even though they all lived in Egypt, there were 2 minhagim. Of course, there were no Ashkenazim. They were all what we call Sephardim, but there were 2 different types of shul. They observed different customs with regard to reading the portions of the Torah. The communities from Babel read a portion each week, like we do, as they do in Spain, he says, where he was from, thus completing the Torah each year. But the communities of Israel do not follow this practice. They divide each portion into 3 sections to finish the Torah every 3 years. Now, that is not, by the way, you may be thinking, well, isn't that what the conservative movement do now? The answer is not the same, because what they, in the conservative shuls, what they do is they divide it into little portions, and they read just a little bit of that portion every week. They read a little bit of Bereshis, and then next week a little bit of Noach, and then the next week a little bit of Lech Lecha. This minhag in Eretz Yisrael, the ancient minhag was not that. Is that they read the Torah in order over 3 years. So you didn't finish every year. You finished only every 3 years. So what do they do on Simchat Torah? They're not finishing anything. So he says, however, there is among them a custom to all join together and pray on the day of Simchat Torah and on the day of Matan Torah. They still celebrated Simchat Torah, even though they read the Torah every 3 years. So the question is really, where did the Jews get this idea of Simchat Torah? Why do they express this idea of this Simcha on Chag specifically through Torah? So there is quite a well-known Midrash, which I think we need to learn together, in number 7, where the Midrash basically sets out a paradigm of a division of 3 types of ways of connecting to God. This is a very deep idea. This is a very important idea. And we're going to give you some ideas as to how to other parts of Judaism fit with this. But have a look together at this, which links with Simchat Torah directly and explains the origin in Jewish thought of Simchat Torah. Look at this Midrash. I'm a Rabbi Alexandri. Rabbi Alexandri said the following: Mashal melech Shabbat lo Simcha kol shiva yimei hamishlah. Okay, Simcha, sorry. There was a king that made a celebration. All 7 days of the celebration, very common for a king to make a 7-day celebration. We see this with Shlomo Melech, in the inauguration of the temple. We see this with Ahasuerus and with Esther. All 7 days, so the king's son ran around looking after all the guests. At the end of the 7 exhausting days, the king says to his son, I know that you've been a busy boy. You've been running around helping with all the guests for 7 days. Now let's just have one last day together, just one after party, one day post party. You don't have to run around too much. And just take a chicken, a little bit, okay? A little piece of meat. We'll sit, we'll have an informal dinner. So too, this mashal, this metaphor really is to the Sukkot. All 7 days of Sukkot, the Jewish people are involved in the 70 cows, the korbanot that we bring on Sukkot for the non-Jewish world. All the 70 cows, as the Midrash here, are parallel to the 70 nations. Now, at the end of these 7 days, coming into Shmini Atzeret, which for us is Simchatura, now let's have just like a private day. You don't have to do too much. No more fancy korbanos, hundreds and hundreds of animals. No. One cow. It's a very small sacrifice on the last day. The same as Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, interestingly. One ram. When the Jewish people heard this idea that there's a special, intimate, joyous festival at the end between them and God, they began to praise and said, now understand what's going on here. This Midrash is a philosophical, a theological discussion. It's not a historical account. This never happened in real time. It's asking a question philosophically. What is the nature of Simcha, and how do we connect to God through Simcha? That's what it's asking. The Jewish people, the idea of Simcha, say, Zeh Hayom, from Halal. We say it every day. On Sukkot. Zeh Hayom Asa Hashem, this is the day that God has made, special day. Nagila, let us celebrate, as in Havat Nagila. The Nismacha, and let us be happy. Bo. In what? In Him? In it? Meaning, is it the day which makes us happy? Is it God which makes us happy? So Amar Rabbi Avin raised the question, we don't know from this verse in Halal yet, what is the source of the Simcha? In Bayom, is it the day? In B'Kodesh Baruch Hu, is it HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Shlomo comes in Shir Hashem at the very beginning and says, Nagila v'nismacha bach. A different word, not ba, which is ambiguous, the day of God, but bach. Nagila v'nismacha bach. Now, the Midrash makes its key point. Bach, what does bach mean in God? How do you have joy, Nagila v'nismacha in God? B'toratach, through your Torah. Bach b'shuatach, through your guidance of the world. And Rabbi Yitzchak adds Bach be'ezrim b'shnai mosi sheksavta lo b'toratach. Bach is Bet Chaf 22, which are the 22 letters of the alphabet. And these 3 themes, and I just want you to think about this and try and come up with ideas that fit with these themes. These 3 themes, which are connecting with God through Torah, that God gave us the Torah, that is one way of energizing a life of connection. None of this is easy, but all of this is required. So one is Torah, one is Yeshua, the idea of God in history. God's hand guides history, human history, certainly Jewish history, and the roller coaster of Jewish history, the ups, the downs, the excitement, the energy. How can you not be energized by thinking about Jewish history, what it means to be part of Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people? So that's the second. And Bach, with the 22 letters of the alphabet, that is referring to the building blocks of the world, the created world. And I actually referred you at the bottom here to the introduction to the Astral Siddur. How long is it since you've read the introduction to the Astral Siddur? It's already nearly 40 years old. But actually, there's a beautiful essay there about this Midrash by Rabbi Nosson Sherman, and he talks about how that actually connects with the idea of creation. And in fact, I brought you here, if you're able to look at this, these 3 ideas: God is the creator, God is the giver of the Torah, and God is the guider of history, are three massive, massive themes that we connect to God in these three different ways. We connect spirituality in these ways. And I brought you some examples, whether it's Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, whether it's Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, whether it's just think about Shabbat, the way we daven on Shabbat. The Friday night Amida on Shabbat is all about God as creator of the world. Shabbat morning is all about God as the giver of the Torah. And Shabbat afternoon is all about the God of redemption and salvation and the God of history, etc. You can think of Malchi as Shofars and Zichronos. You can think of the brachas we make on the Kriya Shema, the Rambam's 13 principles of faith, which again relate to these three ideas: understanding what God is as the creator of existence, understanding how God gave the Torah and what Torah is, and lastly, understanding how God runs the world to the best of our ability. Again, none of these questions are easy. None of them have glib, simple answers, but all of them are essential guiding principles as to how we can get this sense of nagila b'mismacha bach. Again, let's not forget what we're trying to do here. We try to ask, what does Judaism want from us in terms of be happy? How? What are we meant to be doing to establish this? So again, just to summarize where we are so far, we see that there is a mitzvah in the Torah of loving, of connecting to God. We see that there is a stern warning of the consequence of not developing a sense of simcha in our lives. We do so at our own cost, and the cost, God forbid, can be enormous. And we see that this midrash, this idea of connecting to God through either Torah, through being part of the Jewish people, through understanding the world around us, creation, science, etc., these are the key ways. And of course, Simchas Torah is exactly that. Simchas Torah is the ability, is the way the Jewish people focused. They no longer had a temple. They no longer had the sacrifices. They no longer had any of that. But they connected to God most directly through Torah, through picking up a Torah, through dancing with the Torah, through impressing on ourselves what it means to learn Torah, the excitement and the energy gained by connecting with Torah as the vehicle to understanding God. That for us is gold. And therefore Simchas Torah is simply a way of channeling this mitzvah of Simcha on Chag, especially on Shmini Atzeres. The Gemara says, "V'samachta b'chagecha is Sukkot, v'hayita ach sameach." This mitzvah to be only purely happy is Shmini Atzeres Simchatura. The mitzvahs of Simcha, the minhagim, I should say, of Simchatura, are there to channel that idea. Now, this year is not going to be easy. It is not going to be easy. I don't know what it's going to be like in Boreham Wood and Elstree Synagogue. I know we are going to have a very strange Simchas Torah. In Israel, of course, Simchas Torah is always a bit strange because Shmini Atzeret and Simchatura are all joined together. They're all one day. We don't have second day. In many ways, Simchat Torah is a product of second day Yom Tov. And in a community like Israel, where there isn't a second day Yom Tov, you end up with a hybridized day, which is very strange indeed. There's all the minhagim of Shmini Atzeres, there's Yizkar, and there's the prayer for rain, Geshem, and there's all the minhagim of Simchas Torah, and everything that goes with that. And they're all thrust together in this kind of sort of hybrid day. But this year we're going to be sort of dancing at a distance, if dancing at all. It's going to be very, very tricky. It's going to be very challenging. And therefore, I suggest that perhaps the way that one can connect with the simcha of the day is to not necessarily have the accoutrements of the day. We don't have all the shtick and the dancing around and the craziness and necessarily, but we do have the understanding of why we're trying to do it and the ability to take that to the rest of the year. So that's a very, very important point. Let's move on a little bit because we have about 10 or 15 minutes more, and I want to really give you some very practical sources as to how to relate to this on a daily basis. Because this is not just about Simcha on Chag. This is not just about Sukkot or Simchat Torah. This is about taking this into the rest of the year. So let's in the last part of the share, let's look at something which again I don't think is sufficiently discussed. The Sefer Chinuch, one of the classic Rishonim, medieval authorities who counts the mitzvot, 613 mitzvot, he points out there, and this is picked up by really all of the major thinkers afterwards, that there are 6 mitzvot which are constant. The 6 constant mitzvot, also called the Sheish mitzvahs Tamidiyos, which are constantly applicable every waking moment of our lives, from when we turn bar or bat mitzvah until the day that we die. Most mitzvahs are dependent on circumstances. They come and they go. We eat matzah, we're finished. We shake a lulav, we're finished. We put on tefillin, we're finished. We give tzedakah, we're done. Yeah, we help someone across the street, we're finished. It's done. There's a time frame. There are 6 mitzvahs, says the Sefer Chinuch, which never cease to apply every waking moment. And our challenge is to integrate these into our mindset, into our life, into the way we see the world, at the same time as doing all the other things we do. These are mitzvahs that have to be done while we're running our law office, or while we're being a doctor, or while we're working in a factory, or changing the kids' nappies, or taking the kids to, carpool, or painting the door, or whatever we're doing. Whatever we're doing, these mitzvahs are mitzvahs which apply, and therefore we have to give some thought as to each of these mitzvahs, as to how, in what way can this mitzvah be integrated into the way I do everything else. This is why these are very challenging. It's much easier just to do a mitzvah. You start, you don't, you finish. Next, let's get back to life. No, this is life. So these 6 mitzvahs, without going into all of the analysis, are, just let me mention what they are. The first one is the mitzvah of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the idea that there's a mitzvah to understand, know, believe, work out what it means that God exists. Massive, but not for now. There's a mitzvah, lo yeh lecha, to appreciate. This is idolatry, but it doesn't just mean little figurines. It means appreciating that there is no other way to success, to truth, other than the route of connecting with God. That's number 2. Number 3 is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hashem Echad, what does it mean, Hashem Echad? Not that God is one as opposed to 2, 3, or 4, but that there is a oneness, there is a unity that underpins all things. And that makes God undefinable, but all-encompassing. Number 4 is loving God, which we're going to talk about now, Avat Hashem. Number 5 is Yirat Shamayim, developing a seriousness and understanding that the mitzvot and the halacha are real, and that we don't want to get them wrong, because getting them wrong is negative on many levels. And finally, Los Asuru, not to be distracted by all the other nonsense in life that comes and goes and takes our mind off these key things. Now, again, the point is not to be a monk and sit and meditate and be an extremely holy person by focusing on these 6 things all day long. The point is to be normal. The point is to be a cabbie or whatever you are, at the same time as focusing on these 6 things in some meaning, integrating, maybe not focusing on, integrating these as the background noise of our attitudes and decision making. This is what makes this so hard. So I just want to focus a little bit on Ahavat Hashem, which we saw as the mitzvah of Simcha. What that means, and when we ask the question, what do you mean be happy? Really? The answer is yes, really. Really, but not in a sense of walking around thinking everything's hunky-dory, but in a sense of understanding this mitzvah. So let's talk about this just for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'll be happy to take some questions. Let's talk about it as follows. First of all, you know the verse. Shema Yisrael number 8. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol meyodecha. What does that mean? We say that. We don't think of what it means. V'chol levavcha, or v'chol nafshecha, or v'chol meyodecha. We have to develop a love for God with all of our heart, with all of our mind. Leiv is really the mind. With all of our strength, with all of our character. That's a very big demand. It's a very big qualification. It doesn't just say love God. It says b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meyodecha. It talks about the idea ledavka bo, to stick, like devik, to stick, to cling, to cleave to God on some level. And in fact, the Rambam, when he describes the general parameters of this mitzvah in number 10, he says the following. This is one of the most incredible sources in the Rambam, where the Rambam talks about how to make ourselves happy, how to generate through thinking, through focusing in life, this sense of emotion. What is the appropriate way to develop a love for God, he says. It has to be very intense, he says, ultimately. And again, this is a process. Not everybody feels this, and most of us, I don't feel this on a daily basis. You have to work on it. Until our whole nefesh, our whole soul is in some way tied up with Ahavat Hashem. The nimsa shoget bat tamid. And that we are almost intoxicated on a certain level, obsessed on a certain level with God. As if we're lovesick. Lovesickness is an obsession with another person, which is not, by the way, the basis for a long-term stable relationship. That's not an obsession. That's that's a sense of giving to other people, to them. Okay, you can't do that with God. There's nothing you can give to God. That's the challenge of Ahava. There is nothing that you can give to God, and therefore, how are you going to develop a sense of love for God? And he talks about what it means to be lovesick. You can't get a person out of your mind. You can't get them out of your life. When you're thinking, you're sitting down, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're getting up in the morning. The first thing you think about it, he says, this is basically the sense of energy and excitement that we need to develop for Ahavat Hashem. The question is how. How do I do this? Really? I mean, this seems like an enormously distant goal, that we're expected to have this positivity, and yet clearly we are. This is perhaps one of the most difficult mitzvahs in the Torah, to be happy. Something we all want to be, but how to generate that. And therefore, what I've given you at the end of the sheet, and I don't want to talk about this in great detail, but I've given you 9 different ways that the classic sources talk about how to generate Ahavat Hashem. And different people will have different, connections, different ways of interfacing with this mitzvah that will appeal some more to some people, some more to other people. But let me just mention them all. We're not going to learn through all the sources, but let me just mention each of these 9. And then if you want, you can look into the sources, you can go into them more deeply. The first I mentioned already, like Simchatura, study of Torah. That's the primary one. For us, learning Torah is not just a way of gaining knowledge. It's not just a way of a goal-driven exercise. I need to be a rabbi, so I need to sit and learn Torah. No, for us, learning Torah is the very essence of interfacing with God's mind, whatever that means. God connects with us through the text. That's a very fundamental Jewish idea, okay? Therefore, since our interface with God is through this text, learning this text, studying it, dancing with it. I used to be a lawyer for many years. I was in law school. I worked in law firms. I never saw anybody dancing with the tax statutes. I never saw anybody kissing them when they dropped them on the floor. The people don't feel like that towards law, I can promise you, and for a good reason. But to Torah, we do. We kiss it when we drop it on the floor. We dance with it when we're happy. It's a different relationship, and therefore, learning Torah, this applies to men and women alike, by the way. There is no difference in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah in this respect between men and between women. It's learning Torah with a view to connecting with God on a deep and meaningful level and generating excitement. Like, wow, I've got to really meet who wrote this. And the answer is, oh, you mean you want to meet God? Okay, so what does that mean? So that's the first one. The second one is the idea of trying to perform mitzvah, not just because we think that we'll get rewarded or punished or whatever, or because we're scared or for social reasons, but performing mitzvah because we really deeply understand it's the right thing to do. The mitzvah are the right way to go. And having this sense of what they call l'shem shamayim. I'm doing this not because it's good for me, but it's because it's the right thing in life. And that's a very complex area to try and develop that area of that level of connection with the mitzvah itself. But that's the second area. The third is really contemplation, thinking, working out what the meaning of life is. Now, I know that sounds like a terribly airy-fairy kind of question. What's the meaning of life? But actually, we have to think about that. What is the meaning of God? What does it mean that God exists? What does it mean that God runs the world? What is the God that I'm meant to believe in? Do I have a childish understanding of that God? Am I looking at it with enough subtlety, sophistication? Do I still think of it like a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old or even like a 20-year-old? Or has it kept track with my development? The Rambam clearly in a number of places says that is the way to come to Ahavat Hashem, that sense of struggle, and it can be a struggle, and it doesn't always make you happy every minute, but that sense of struggle is that gives meaning and depth, and also realizing that there are things in life which are nonsense and setting them aside. That's one of the reasons why we read Kohelet on Succot. Since Succot is this mitzvah of Simcha, and focus on Simcha, we read Kohelet to show that there are things in life which distract us from that, which are really nonsense. Havel havalim, make all the nonsense into nonsense and understand what's real. So that's the third way. The fourth way is through the study of the secular topics, science, physics, chemistry, nature. Very important. Judaism is very focused on the value of learning secular topics. Okay. There are limits. How those limits work is beyond the scope of this share. I brought you a reference to a book called Torah Umada, written by Dr. Norman Lamb, Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb, who just passed away about a month or two ago. He was the dean of YU, and he talked about this at great length. So studying secular topics can be a means to Avas Hashem, and the Rambam talks about studying nature science. Studying Jewish history, number 5. As I said before, the excitement about seeing what it means to be a Jew, especially to communicate that to teens, to kids, that being part of Klal Yisrael is unbelievably exciting, energizing, important, valued. Okay, it doesn't make you better than everybody else, but it makes you part of an extremely exciting historical journey. That's number 5. Number 6, avoiding materialism. The Mishnah Berurah brings down at the very beginning that getting focused on money is one of the best ways of losing this mitzvah. Okay, of not doing this mitzvah, and therefore avoiding materialism is key. Hard to do in today's world. 7, I put here being a kiddush Hashem, the idea of being someone that others look at as being, wow, look at this person. She represents Torah. Look how they act. They're so honest. We want to emulate them. We want to be like them. It's amazing. People who connect with Torah become those people, those kind of people. That is an Avat Hashem exercise. The converse, of course, is if people represent Torah, but they behave badly, they let the side down, they're not honest, they're not straightforward, and they give Torah a bad name. So that is the opposite of Avat Hashem. Number 8, the idea of Mesirut Nefesh, that sometimes, and these are all sources that talk about sometimes we have to give up things that are hard in life in order to sacrifice for what we believe in, for what we think is important. What do we stand for in life? And sometimes we're required to do that. God forbid we should ever be required to make the ultimate sacrifice for Avat Hashem of giving up our lives, but we give up other things. We can't take every job that we want, and we can't go to every client meeting that we want. There are things that we can't do, and that's part of that giving up from our lives is part of Avat Hashem. And finally, and we'll finish with this, the idea of Jewish outreach. The Rambam here says in number 23 at the end of the sheet that when we really love something, we want to share it with other people. We believe it's important. We believe that other people will benefit from it. And therefore, if we really, really get excited about this, so then we want to go and help spread that excitement, not in an evangelical way, but in an honest way. Evangelical can be an honest way as well, but I'm saying we're not trying to preach to others. We're trying to help others understand that this is a source of great positivity and excitement, and therefore we can share that with them. These are all practical ways that the sources say connect with Avos Hashem. Now, we need to work out what this means for us in 2020, living in Boreham Wood or wherever we live. What does it mean to be a Kiddush Hashem? What does it mean to learn more Torah, and not just more, but in a qualitative way to connect us? What does it mean to get excited about being Jewish? What does it mean to give up something that we know is not the right thing, but for the right reason? What do all of these things mean? And I challenge you to take these ideas and say, well, when the Torah is telling me that I really have to be happy, and that happiness is not a cigar called Hamlet, by the way, in case any of you remember that. Happiness is the mitzvah, says the Torah, of understanding Avat Hashem. And this mitzvah that applies on a constant basis, this mitzvah is applicable in so many different ways, as we've seen. Okay, and Simchas Torah and Sukkot generally is just almost like a lens to focus that in and to put our minds, to turn our minds to this idea of Simcha and to ask ourselves what it means, what it is, and how we can achieve it. That's really what we're meant to be doing on these days. And all of our minhagim, all of our customs, whether it's reading Kohelet, whether it's finishing the Torah and dancing with the Torah, these are all ways of focusing our understanding on this idea. So that's all I want to say. I hope that addresses a topic that I think is so fundamental. It should be on the curriculum of every kid at really the beginning of high school, I think, and develop throughout their high school life. Sadly, I don't think it is, but maybe that's something we can change. So I hope that was helpful, interesting. I'm sorry we were a bit delayed at the beginning, but we got there in the end. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If anyone has any comments, I'd be happy to address them. If anybody's still awake, then I'd be happy to hear that too. But I'm sure that you're, thumbs up. Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that too. But then I'll take this opportunity to thank you for being on the ship. I know that you're all busy. You have other things to do. And I wish you a Chag Sameach, Mo'adim L'Simcha, and hopefully you'll get some sunshine to be able to do that. Question, excellent. Can one specialize? Not only can one specialize, but one must specialize. Meaning, one of the things that the Torah talks about a lot is choosing your mitzvah. Their entire Gemara is related to this. That the different rabbis in the Gemara say, I related most to this particular mitzvah, and I made this my specialism. And therefore, I think that that's actually a very valid topic. One of the ways that we can do this is not just one of these 8 ways, but any mitzvah that you feel that you most resonate with. And there are so many. There are so many mitzvahs. You can't turn around and say, well, I looked in the book and I don't know, nothing spoke to me. Really, nothing spoke to you out of thousands of mitzvot? So everybody should try and focus on at least 1 or 2 mitzvot that they really feel are them, their character, and do them to the very best of their abilities. And this way of Ahavat Hashem as well. Like I said, not everybody relates to studying nature or science. Not everybody's interested in Jewish history, but different people can study different things and focus on different things. That's one of the joys of Judaism. It's just so varied that you can really connect to it where you are, because it has something to say to you, because it's just so detailed, like life is so detailed. Okay, good. So it's late here. It's 11 o'clock now. I wish you a good night. Chag Sameach. Thank you very much. If anyone wants to send me an email, I'll just put on the chat. I'll just put my email on the chat so that anyone can be in touch with me if they want. It's very easy. It's actually on the sheets. There's my email. Please feel free to be in touch. I'll be happy to hear from you. Also, Rabbi Chapa has it. So thank you all for all your patience and for being on the share. I wish you a good night. All the very best.